I would like to welcome our participants and the trainers to this second day of training. Remember that this is part of our capacity building program to ensure that staff members of our network gain the skill needed for them to translate the courses or the content they're teaching into online materials. And to do that, we would like them to get additional skills on how to deliver or how to develop content and deliver the content online. We carefully chose this group, A-Tech, who we believe have got the experience and the skills required to help cause the learning that we need. So in this second day, we expect more from the team from A-Tech. But I urge the members who are participating in this meeting to be able to interact freely and to ask any questions and to be able to demonstrate the skills they've learned. It is a 5-day training, so this is the second day. So hopefully you will get on well, and I hope that everything will be fine. In the end, you should be having adequate skill to participate in our next phase of the project, that is developing content which we want to be hosted on our regional e-learning platform. So thank you very much, and I wish you a fruitful second day of training. So back to, I give now the floor to the trainers. Drake, please carry on.
Okay, thank you, Francis. So good morning, everyone. I will take today's session as lead. I have my colleagues. I'm sure Prof is going to join us a little bit late, but I think I have Robert, Bob, I have, I think, Joseph, and I should be able to have Collins online and Fiona at some stage. I will put off my video to optimize the network. So this morning, we will start with understanding how you do your content design, what we call instructional design, for learning, e-learning. And one of the things that you find in the e-learning principles is that we must design the learning objects in a way that stimulates the learner to learn, and also it increases the retention and assimilation of knowledge. Sorry, second is a kind of parking making noise. Okay, sorry about that. I've gotten the issue sorted. So today we focus on how do we design the digital content, and largely using the higher education learning object as we take us through it. So in terms of what we'll cover in the next about 1 hour maybe and about 45 minutes is really learning content management And then we do the added model, which is basically is about analyze your learning needs, design your instruction materials, develop those instruction materials, guided by a number of theories, implement, but also evaluate the learning outcome. And then, of course, we'll go to techniques of instruction design, and then learning object concepts. How do you conceptualize your learning materials for e-learning? And then really, we walk you through how you can design a particular course in this case, and then principles of content presentation. And then, of course, you have an exercise of trying to build your own course that you're trying to do, you're currently facilitating at your institution. So Prof. Jude yesterday really alluded to this, and I'm just going to recap, particularly for those that were not present or they missed one or two things, is one, there's indeed a paradigm shift in learning. So from a student-centered, from a teacher-centered to a student-centered learning. Also, we are moving to personalized learning, trying to design learning in a way that is individualism, whereby each learner in a class of 5, people have different learning habits and learning attributes. And you tend to design your learning objects or your course in a way that tries to appeal to the different characters of learners. And all that is aimed at really enhancing the effectiveness of learning so that the learner outcomes that you set are actually achieved in the time that you set to achieve. So we observe that really whatever we do is not done out of observation, but rather from the theory, which is a learning practice. So we note that the major underpinning theory as far as e-learning is concerned is around constructivism, which is basically a process of knowledge construction in a social context. So we believe, and the scholars believe, that we learn, or the learners learn, one, by assimilating knowledge in the environment and trying to visualize it and to try to integrate it in their own perspective. So each learner will have a different context-specific view of knowledge and its application in a given domain. And that is one key. We'll see other theories that are guiding us. Then we have also a theory of instruction, which is basically created within the learning content to encourage information processing. So ideally, when we speak of general what you should do, but the how sometimes is very important. So informing learners their learning objectives, stimulating recall of prior learning, providing learner clear guidance and assessment is part and principle of how we think about designing content for e-learning. So as Prof was discussing yesterday, and maybe some of you could be exposed to this knowledge, is that there is a significant number of challenges with e-learning systems integration. And really, what we see from our practitioners' experience, we've illustrated over 40 different projects of e-learning across the continent. And then you see that you have technology-driven as opposed to requirement-driven. So most institutions will come to you and say, look, we want to do e-learning, and then because someone has done it. But you need to put your context. If your faculty is basically on biological sciences, what kind of learning technologies and approaches would you need to have? So that is very, very important to put in context. If you are from social science, do we have a one-size-fits-all? That can also be a challenge. So learner and pedagogical requirements are not considered sometimes. So we need to look at, for example, the different levels of education. So if you are talking about primary level, secondary level, or higher level, they have different learning requirements and basically patterns as well. So that will define which technology is appropriate and so on. Then we have the lack of emphasis on content itself. So you find that most e-learning implementations largely focus on technology access as opposed to the content. So we encourage kind of the internet and others are making us a little bit lazy. So, but we encourage to contextualization of content. So where, for example, you have this material coming from us, when it comes to you, for example, to deliver a similar module like this, you can use this material, but it's important to contextualize it. It is important to add value to it so that your learners actually can relate to the message that you're trying to. So really, we need to personalize the learning process, put things like prior knowledge of the learner, learning life cycle, and so on. And of course, the context of learning. So that must be at center in every instruction design. There's also a challenge of where people ignore educational requirements. So sometimes if you have too much control to learners, then you can have a problem of meeting the learning goals. So that has been and we continue to observe as one of the issues. Then there should be tailored learning materials in the context of each learner and based on theories, in form and flavor. So for example, if you say in form, if someone would like to have learning in form of music, that's a form, but there are different flavors of music. So which music? Is it country music or R&B and so on? So you can see the form is the means, but the flavor is very context sensitive to that particular learner. So lower to high level of education have different learning abilities. For example, if you're looking at teaching someone, a classic example is a Bible. So people, you see there's a Bible for children and a Bible for the adult, and the Bible for the children is largely constituting pictures, images, and very basic illustrative stories. Whereas as the adults, we have more complex, even some of them, the language itself is even complicated. So that tells you that someone trying to pass this message is looking at the different learners' abilities and interests and guided by theories, following the simple principle of form and flavor to design. So similarly for all of us, as we try to design our materials, don't forget the form and flavor approach. And then really there's the other aspect, the influence between education. So you're seeing issues of course deadline and timetables. So how much leeway can you give? Sometimes self-paced learning can be slower if the learning, if the concepts are more complex. But you have a deadline, so the course must run within a semester. Assessments can be done by this time. So there is a need really to balance those education requirements and also personal learning requirements. So I guess in a point that in e-learning, really, there's a lot of emphasis on the foundation of knowledge. So how much the person has as a basic knowledge is very, very critical in being able to adapt to the learning object that we design. And learning schedules. So when we talk about personalized learning, we have to remember that our human brains works differently. And some of us are very active in the night, others are very active in the morning. So you may find that some people find it very easy to read and do their learning activities late in the night or early in the morning. So as you schedule your activities for the learners, you have to put that kind of into context. So let's go through this added model. So number one, really, we have to focus on analyzing. So what do we analyze? We analyze our learners. What are the learners and what are their needs? So if I'm teaching a course, for example, at the university called cybersecurity, so I'm going to ask myself, who are the students we have in this cybersecurity or introduction to cryptography? Cryptography is a course that largely requires a lot of mathematics. Which kind of mathematics do they know? They have been exposed to, but there's an exposure and knowledge. There's being aware of facts, but there's also application of that fact. So they are talking about determining learner characteristics. So their age, their background, their education background, level of knowledge relevant to a topic. Since we're dealing with e-learning, really computer literacy is key because we may ask someone to do an online essay to type, and you're giving it 30 minutes. So, but because the typing speed of this learner is slower, he will score less or unable to meet all the requirements, not because he cannot or she cannot, but rather because the digital skill levels are still low. There are other issues about access to technology. So really, we're talking about this technology, but is this technology available? What about the internet connectivity and other related experience? So really, you take a lot of time to analyze the characteristics of your learner so that you can be able to design your modules in a way that meets a learner's needs. What do learners need to know? So this is largely informed by the learner outcomes. So if I'm teaching a course, for example, this module, what really I want people to know, first of all, I would like to know, to allow people participating in this course to appreciate the grounding theories of how do you design an effective e-learning course material. So it's not just about learning to make the materials, but why should you make a choice of X, Y, and Z? That's number one learning outcome. Then number two, really, how do you do it? So this is what I'm walking through. So really, we expect that what do learners need to know? And this can be largely be informed by, of course, the program needs, the course needs as articulated in the program outline and so on. Then there should be a conversation. We talk about engaging consultation. With who? It's very important. So normally when you're designing a course, it's nice to do a pre-course evaluation with the learners. Run a simple survey tool. What kind of knowledge do they know? What's their background? Why are they taking that particular course? Do you have a reason why these learners have a course they are taking? So for example, if a course is an elective, it is nice to have an understanding of the motivation why the course chose a course, the students chose a particular course. Now I say, I think I like more practical. Maybe because this course, I like it has a lot of community engagement. So it means to meet their expectation really, you need to know their expectation in advance. And you can, in that respect, you can modify your course design and delivery mechanisms. So the consultation really can be as wide as dedicated to you, the learners, advisory committee, community, industry, among others. Then when it comes to designing, you have to look at the course suitable for online delivery. So the question, not every course, our friends and colleagues, that is really ideal for online delivery or part of it, okay? So we need to the first question is my course I'm delivering suitable for online delivery? Or what kind of parts of the course can I? And I think Prof. Jude must have discussed this yesterday. So which parts of the course do I need to make online, which parts I have to take offline? For example, I'm doing a course in clinical medicine, and maybe I'm doing a course like anatomy. Yes, we know there are other tools and techniques called virtual reality, where you can do like sort of virtual surgery and look at muscles, but it can never replace the actual human feeling of touching a dead body. So that is exactly what you have. Sorry about that noise. Let me find someone to discuss in the parking. Okay, sorry, my office is in the wrong section of the parking, so but being able to get them sorted. So we're mentioning about you making the design, and we're talking about the suitability of your course. So you have to look at your curriculum, you have to look at the learner outcome, and you have to make a decision. So which course? So I was giving an example of a course like an anatomy in clinical medicine. So what parts of that may be online? and what parts of that course need to be offline. Then you have to create what you call a program or course learning outcomes. So based on what knowledge skills you like to pass on to the learners, then you will need to define completely the course learning outcomes. Then we have core concepts. So you need to define the core concepts in the course. So these core concepts, just as I say, for example, I'm teaching a course called cryptography, I may need to define what is cryptology, what is cryptanalysis, what is an encryption, what is a key. So you are creating those core concepts that are going to be in your course. Now, in designing really, it goes to one fundamental principle is sequencing of courses and course delivery units. Which knowledge links to which principle links to which, and that's something that as a course designer, you're going to debate. And as you debate, then you make a determination based on the best fit, okay? For example, if you're going to teach someone about computer application, for sure someone cannot learn computer applications unless he knows how to power on a computer, to know the different parts of the computer. So I cannot be able to type on a computer unless I know there's a keyboard, there's a mouse, and the different functions and so on. So that's basic. Then besides that, I need to know the principle of operating system because applications run on operating systems. So in that respect, we have to design the sequencing of the course in a way that meets our expectation. So basic computer literacy, you'll always see world over, they will start with principles of what a computer is. What are different types of computing approaches you have, quantum computing, name it and name it. So really, it is that understanding that knowledge is built from having basic understanding to more complex areas of knowledge. Hey, Benjamin Wiarugaba, you can't view the screen. Maybe it's your network. I hope, has everyone been able to see the screen?
We can see.
Yes.
We can see.
Okay.
Can see it.
Okay, thank you. So Benjamin, I think you must be having a problem with your network.
Okay, let me try to shift and see whether I will see it in another location.
Okay. Then let's walk to shift to development. So what is developing now? You've been able to visualize what course is supposed to be, what learning activities you need, what your learners are supposed to be, and so on. So what learning activities will be involved? So you have to come to learning activities. Are you going to have group discussions? Are you going to have some sort of individual activities and so on? How and when will learners be assessed? That's very, very critical. You have to schedule the timing, how and when. How is it? I'm going to share with you at a later stage the different formative forms of assessment. When is the timing? Type of communication with students. It's very, very critical. How you need to set up an expectation. Our own experience is that when you set up learning platforms and you're doing about e-learning, students will communicate to you as and when. For example, you are a lecturer, a student starts doing an assessment or trying to read at past midnight. That student, when he gets a problem, he'll send you an email. He'll even send you a WhatsApp because that's the time he has gotten an issue. So are you going to wake up in the middle of the night and respond to this WhatsApp? So these are issues that you have to deal with. So types of communication with the students, resources, learning materials, and experiences. So you actually develop learning resources. When you talk about learning resources, is that one, you set up the materials themselves, reference books, experiences, and many others, and you set those up to the learning resources. How will the students engage in active learning? So you define active learning is about interaction. So you have to define which are those activities and actions will the students undertake. Then, how will students accommodating a variety in learning styles? Now, this is a very key problem, as we already indicated. So in whatever we design, we have to be careful to ensure that different activities accommodate. For example, you put materials. We always encourage when you're designing your learning materials, you can put text, but you can also complement them with multimedia. So you have to put, we have mentioned different learning styles. So for example, others would want PowerPoints. And I've seen it in my classes. Students, when you give them PowerPoints, they think the PowerPoint is the all material they need. So it's nice for a lecturer, you can put a PowerPoint. If you put a PowerPoint, you can maybe add a YouTube video to allow someone who's not able to follow through the entire PowerPoint, but you can add a book. And at the end, maybe you can now attach an activity so that a learner can really, you are trying to appeal to different classes of the learners. So create learning communities. So the best way to create learning communities really is if there's something that brings together. The reason, colleagues, we are all inconveniencing ourselves to be in this meeting is because you need certain knowledge and we have certain knowledge. So there's a need that is already between us. There's a need to share, there's a need to learn. So the best way to create a community of learning is if there are peer actions. How do you create peer actions? Group work, discussion forums, student research, and presentations, student seminars. These allow you to activate the learning within the students themselves. So then we are, prior to implementation, ensure that the test students have provided coursework feedback related to each of views and clarity. So each time you run a course, don't focus on just merely assessing students. Can the students also assess the course delivery? Can they give you feedback in terms of how the course was well structured, in terms of the clarity and depth of the materials, in terms of the delivery mechanisms, in terms of assessment feedback? These are very, very important because at the end of the day, you are only a mirror of yourself. So the students give you the better perspective of whether that your intended goals have actually been met, besides you assessing the students. And then, of course, have quality assurance review. Okay, Collins, I can see, thank you. In terms of implementation, so implement the course. So what does implementing a course mean? Actually, you go to the learning management system you're using, and you start populating the different sections of this course. You structure the course the way you want, as Prof indicated yesterday and Joseph, and then you upload the different materials, you set up learning activities, you enroll student activities. If there are group activities, you allocate group activities. If the assessment framework and you're going to use a question bank, you set up questions, a question bank. And of course, you define the different grading criteria. So basically, implementation means go and instantiate whatever you've designed onto a learning management system. Evaluation. So to evaluate really the course, as we've already indicated, it's a prerequisite in any education to assess the progression of knowledge access and assimilation. So we need to evaluate. What are we evaluating? Student success, but their feedback as well. Can we also have external evaluators? Now, in this case, I know most universities have quality assurance units. Can a quality assurance actually walk to these courses, really say, is this course well designed? Is the way the course designed on learning management system, given the learning outcome of this particular course, can those learning outcomes be met? Okay, and that can be the key focus. So focus on this organization of online materials, transition between learning points. So for example, really, if I'm teaching a course like programming, introduction programming. And maybe the very first lecture, I'm telling the students about the history of programming and talking about functions, files, and so on. Then all of a sudden, without defining the different approaches to programming, I start teaching them object-oriented programming. So the question is, what is the non-object-oriented programming? Yeah. So if you have structured an object, then it's better that before you dive in to discuss the depths of object-oriented programming, you must introduce these students to the general classes of programming, so that there is no gap in transition and acceptation. Then there is clarity of explanation. And explanation provided very clear, and so on. So multiple representation of ideas, I've already indicated that. So have you catered for the different learning needs of the learners? So text, videos, audio, and so on. But also, is the course designed with sufficient student participation? Because what you see oftentimes is that learners, sometimes without a mechanism that enforce their participation, they can choose to download the materials, they go offline and they read and they come and sit the exam. But you can design your course in a way that every activity, even when a student reads a module, he must mark it as complete. Okay, that's a feedback. That also conforms the participation. You can also ensure that your grade book takes the different actions the learner does, so that reading a material and completing it and marking it gives you a grade of completion. Okay, and then of course, feedback. Is there sufficient mechanism of getting student feedback? Right in terms of the knowledge itself, but in terms of the process of learning itself. Good. Now, something else that is very interesting in this field is how do we design and why do we design the learning materials the way the courses the way we do? So there are a number of theories, and I would like us to reflect. I know some of us are teachers, others may not. So there are theories that guide your choices of action as a teacher, as an educator. One is cognitive theory of learning. So this reminds us the way people think. Okay, cognitive learning theory impacts students because the understanding of their thought process can help them learn. Teachers can give students opportunities to ask questions, to fail, and to think aloud. So cognitive theory, it's good that we learn through challenging our mind to think beyond the normal, what we see. And the only way you can do that is by allowing students to think. You ask them questions, or they ask questions, and they need to think aloud. Your course should allow there's no wrong answer approach in some activities. So learners should be able to share their thoughts freely. The other part, really, the other theory that's also very important as you think about your how you structure your course is behavioralism of learning. So the idea is that how students behave is based on their interaction. It's based on their interaction with their environment. It suggests that behaviors are influenced and learned from external forces rather than internal. For example, a teacher in a classroom, you can utilize what you call positive reinforcement to help learners learn better a particular concept. If I'm teaching a module like, which good module in entrepreneurship, and we're talking about opportunity identification in an environment. So you are asking students to express themselves. What opportunity do they see? Now, sometimes we tell you, you know what, I like to sell juice because my neighbors there, they don't take a lot of juice. Much as you can have a high understanding that the juice business may not work in the area you are in, then you still say, that's very good, okay? Can we try to refine better that concept? So really, when you're first guessing the concept is not necessarily the great one, but you're encouraging the student to think and adapt. And so in a classroom, really, you can also, that particular approach will encourage others who have been maybe fearful or not less expressive to be more expressive, because we always fear as individuals to be humiliated. Then constructivism theory, we already discussed it, is based on the idea that students actually create their own learning based on their past experiences. So we all do. So from this lecture, I'm very sure some of you will actually take this material, go and learn it, relearn it, and learn it, and create your own material and your own experience. And you'll be in another forum when you're teaching other colleagues about e-learning, and you're based on your own understanding. So basically, teachers in a constructive classroom act more as a guide to help learners create their own learning and understanding. Okay, and this is going to be very key as you adapt e-learning, because gone are the days where a lecturer or a teacher, you are the oracle of knowledge, but rather now you are a process facilitator. So the knowledge exists out there. The challenge learners have is how do we integrate different knowledge domains to create a consistent knowledge ontology for a given field. Humanism is a very closely related to constructivism, but focuses on the idea of self-actualization. Teachers can create classroom environments that help learners to get closer to their self-actualization. How? If you imagine all of us have degrees of expectation, a student would want to get an A in class. That is the idea of self-actualization. I want to do well. I want to do better. So how do you help? That's why you see that at very formative years of education, teachers give students things like stars, give them stickers on their books and so on. That helps the learner. So in the e-learning system, you realize that we have things like badges. Yeah, so you can set up badges for your classroom so that when someone completes a particular assignment, they complete a particular logic or puzzle, then they receive a badge. And the number of badges, maybe you can give them some certain points. So they can even get a recognition for that particular work. So that encourages the self-paced learning and integration of knowledge. Then the other thing you will know in e-learning that brings a new dimension to learning is connectivism. So in here that focus on the people learn and grow when they form connections. And actually it's very true even in native nature. You see in our own experiences, every friend you have influences you in a particular way. If you have a friend who watches football, you get some ideas about football. If you have a friend who talks more about medicine, you start speaking medicine. If you talk about a friend who speaks more agriculture, you start speaking agriculture. So that tells you that since learners in e-learning, they are able to connect to different diverse sources of knowledge, they will essentially grow in the different fields. So the work now, as you define your learning outcomes, you must be able to help the learners to focus. That becomes your challenge as an educator. The instructional learning theory can be a valuable tool for dealing with difficult learners, yeah, who like to disrupt the classroom and cause trouble. And I think we all know there are people who will always ask hard questions, not necessarily hard, but provocative questions. There are those who like to distract others from paying attention and so on. So really, this theory allows us on the concept of children learning from observing others by acting or not acting on what they exhibit their classmates. So it tells us to accept that yes, there are learners who have certain bad characters, but how do you use tools? Okay, I remember in some old classes in the lower levels, we used to be told that bad behaved students are given more responsibilities. So if someone who's talking too much in class, make that person a class monitor. Chances are the person will talk less or will be more stubborn because it's supposed to be accountable. So that kind of approach. So you need, using this social learning theory, you can actually identify those learners and just use activities that harvest their energy. You transfer it from one location of bad character into positive energy in terms of learning. Then we have what we call experiential learning, and really this focuses on learning by doing. So, and this is where like largely practical courses and skills development actually focus on. So if you are teaching a course like entrepreneurship, it should be at least 50%, 60% practical. Someone should design a product. Someone should know the price. Someone should go and do a market assessment. Someone should build a business plan. Someone should make actually a sale, go out in the field and try to make a sale. If I'm teaching someone programming, I should be able to build an application I should write code. So if I tell you this is a library, this is how the function looks like, then someone should actually go ahead and write that particular code. So by writing, they develop the knowledge and of course, associated skills are developed. So generally, colleagues, teachers can create specific strategies and techniques to apply all these learning theories in your classroom, what we call the e-classrooms, of course. So let's talk about techniques for instructional design. So we're here to learn how to design modules and courses. Question is, how do we do it? So principle number one, or action one, gathering content. So before you think about what code I'm going to do, or how I'm going to, before you design your content, you must look for the content. What is this content? Go to the course syllabus, pick out, read. Now, don't follow, because now some of our courses, you find the course has been designed 5 years ago, and the technologies have changed. Requirements you need to have changed. So don't say I'm going to teach PHP 1.0 because it was one that is recommended in class, in the course curriculum. Teach the latest PHP. So go and find about the materials. What is the learning? What are the course goals? What are the anticipated learning outcomes? What are the transferable skills expected to be built for this learner? What are the assessment methods and strategies defined by the standard guidelines? Because there you have to be compliant with the quality assurance and the system provided. So that's very, very critical. Then look for the relevant materials that were indicated as indicative content. Look for books, PowerPoint presentation, videos, and so on, and gather them. So synthesize these things. In content instruction, you apply what you call a high education order concept for content design at different levels of details. What you call from learning object, information object, assessment object, practical object, and other objects, as you will see. And then content presentation. So I gather the content. The content instruction is where I now am structuring that content in terms of the different objects. And then the presentation is actually the visual, the hard artifacts. The curtailed presentation mode of the information content, including adequate media heights. So for example, part of it, I'm going to maybe present it as a Word document. Another I may present as a simple animation. Another as a PowerPoint. Another as a PDF. Another form in form of maybe a quiz. So just a reference book. So the content presentation is the theater of what people see as the output. But the other two are largely processes behind that you do and the clients will never see. So let's talk about the learning object. So basically, what is a learning object? So if you do around a search, you realize that a learning object is none other than an entity, which is digital node, which can be used to assist knowledge construction based on the simple learning objective. So if the learning objective of this module currently I'm facilitating is making people aware of the foundation theories that guide the construction design of learning materials, okay? So I create a learning object around that particular learning objective to make you aware. That is the objective. So I make a learning objective. A learning objective is a modular resource, usually digital, web-based, that can be used or used to support learning activities, okay? So adapt learning standards from IEEE. We have SCORM, which is Shareable Content Object Reference Model, and Instruction Management Systems model as well. So learning objects are largely need to be granular, they need to be reusable, and must allow interoperability and aggregation. So as you design your learning object, a classic example is if I have a learning object called cryptography, and I'm teaching a course called cybersecurity. So we all know that there's no cybersecurity without cryptography. Therefore, what will I do? I will have to define cryptology or cryptography in a way that should I be teaching software security, I can simply call this module in software security, okay? If I'm using information security, I can actually code. If I'm teaching a course called cryptology, I can actually still have this module called cryptography. So that's what I call granular, reusable, interoperability, and aggregation. So you design your learning modules in a way, or learning object in a way that it can be reused, it can be integrated into other courses or other modules. So the best practice really comes from what we call a usable learning object, which was largely designed by Cisco around 2003. And you're all aware that Cisco has been a pioneer and a key enabler of e-learning. And they are groundbreakers in many, that they build a sustainable e-learning ecosystem that up to today still remains one of the world's largest learning platforms that we can all reference to. So why learning objects? So learning objects are very important. One, they help you address a learning objective or educational outcome. I've explained this in detail. Yeah. So just as I've said, if I'm teaching a course cryptology and I have a course cryptography, a learning object called cryptography, then I can define it in a way that surely by the someone completes that learning object, you have sufficient knowledge and understanding of what cryptography is all about. Assist learners solve problems or solve subject areas in a different ways. So the way you design your learning objects, because you are designing it in a way that accommodates different learner abilities, desires, and skills. This allows learners different learning styles, ability to explore different paths to a solution. When I talk about that, you may ask yourself, what do you really mean? Now, think through. If you're teaching a course called all of us are Cisco, the fact you're online, we have ever done a course called computer literacy or digital literacy. So this course has the foundation principle. What is a computer? Parts of the computer. From there, you're introduced to operating systems. From there, you're introduced to computer applications. Now, assume your learning object was computer literacy. Then you have information objects, foundations of computing, operating systems, and then you have computer applications. So it means the way I design my module, my learning object, I can make sure that someone can actually read and understand, start with learning what computer applications very well. He appreciates them without ever going to, without reading operating systems. Okay, that's how we talk. So people, you can even start with assignments or quizzes. So someone starts the knowledge by teasing, how much do I know about this subject matter before I even open the content that they have. So you put a quiz. So the learner starts by testing what they know, as opposed to following what you've provided them, and then they do a quiz. So a quiz people can start from the quiz, then they end up with reading. So that's the way we're talking about accommodative learning styles, abilities, and a different path to the solution. What's the solution here? You are trying to teach a student how to use a computer, how to become computer literate. So you can start on top, on bottom, in the middle, and so on, depending on your needs and abilities. So, and you see in a design, most effective learning objects, they are those that require a lot of interactions, that encourage learners to act on information, to seek information. That increases knowledge assimilation and knowledge retention. So learning objects allow educators to give learners access to materials they may otherwise not physically be able to access. Okay, so for example, if you provide a game or a quiz that requires learners to write something and get to you a feedback, essentially when the learners write something to you, they may open a new field of domain. Yeah, so you ask a student, go and do research about different mobile applications in the mobile banking. So for you, maybe not only 3. Someone will bring something else that you're never aware about. Now, that opens you access to materials they never had, but also opens your knowledge that you're going to pass it over to other learners. So makes lessons and learning more engaging and interesting. So learning objects are by principle supposed to make the learning process more engaging, but also more interesting and attractive to different classes of learners. So a classic example, a classical template of a learning object, what you see a reusable learning object from Cisco system, you see serve for training purposes in industry and involves training tasks. So Cisco, the way they conceptualized this was they looked at an engineer, like a network engineer, and they say, look, what kind of tasks does an engineer do? So this engineer would want to do, for example, a VLAN configuration, virtual network, local area network configurations. So they create that one as a learning object. Okay, this person must set up port security. So they create a port security learning object. So this was largely inspired by passing on of industrial skills or development of skills that serve the industry in a short period of time. So what they do, they provide the overview, they define the different reusable learning objects, and Cisco standard said no, for each reusable learning, don't go beyond 7. So you can have 5 to 7. Sorry, don't go to 9, beyond 9. You can have between 5 to 9 reusable learning object, information objects within a learning object. Then at the end, because you want to make it easier for someone to understand and apply, because they focus on instructions, provide a summary. So at the beginning of the learning object, you have an overview. What is the requisite knowledge you need to have? What kind of skills you expect to build? What kind of knowledge do you expect to acquire if you follow this information object? At the end, it gives a summary of to what extent the set objects have been covered. And then you can see the assessment is done at portfolio based. So each information object has an assessment. So by the time you complete, you do also a summative assessment. Okay. So also Cisco, because they wanted to do, they're focusing on industry. They encourage, before you do you embody into an object, you do a pre-learning object knowledge assessment. So you test yourself, what do you really know? That helps in setting up kind of the questions that you have during your summary, and because they go to a knowledge bank, they check what do you know, you seem to be good at this, so they will reshuffle those questions and give you other sets of questions for areas that you are a bit weak, to check whether you have made progress or not. So this is a classic example of a learning object from Cisco systems. Then we have now what most of us will largely be dealing with is a learning object in higher education, okay? So here, this begins with a module, like Cisco, present an overview. We have a series of information objects. Some of us will call them maybe subtopics or some subunits within the course unit. Then each of these information objects may have a practical object. It may also have an assessment object. And then, of course, we have a summary at the end of the design. Next. Thank you. So how do we relate our information objects in terms of course design with our structures within the university systems? So when you look at the university, a university holds all programs. This understanding is that programs are housed at schools. So if you go to a school, like for example, a college, courses in biological sciences, maybe you find them in the School of Medicine. You find social sciences, maybe in the College of Social Sciences. Then a course unit, when a program may exist at a school level or even at a department, but course units are largely attached to a department. Course units are largely attached to a department. So when you look at some schools, so if you go to a course, because now we have this integrated knowledge development. So you find someone is doing a course, say in medicine, he has to do like 20% courses in management. So you take a course at the departmental level. Now that course will have a number of modules. So you have a course with modules 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe up to 10. Now each module will have some topics, and the topic is actually with the details of the material that needs to be covered. That topic will also, the module will also have the assessment. And of course, if it's a practical or what you call lecture hours or practical hours, it also may exist. So that's a course by design. Now, this course in a department will have an instructional designer. There's always a course owner. Now, in most of the universities, you find the course owner is owned by a lecturer who is earmarked to teach that course. How do we relate this to our learning object design? So really, a module is our learning object, okay? And every topic we have in that module becomes our information object. Then we have the assessment object is of course for assessment. And if you have a practical object, any practical that is provided for becomes a practical object in our course design. So that was a little high concept. Let's now drill it down to something that is easier that you can actually relate to. So you can see now your component module, there's a level, there's IM, learning outcome, prerequisite, requisites, indicative content, assessment strategy, and any credits are to be given. So you can see the level of the module. Is this a master's, a PhD, is a bachelor's? Is it which, if it's bachelor's, which year, year 1 year up to year 4? The IM focuses on importance and expectation of the course. And then we go to indicative content, this was called information object. And we go to, we can also have a practical object within the indicative content. Learning outcomes, accessible learning outcomes with associated transferable skills. So it's very, very clear when you're defining your learning outcomes, you must put in the back of your mind that are these accessible in terms of knowledge and skills are developed. And then of course you have the assessment strategy, okay? And then last but not least, really that leads to your assessment objective. So this is how we look at the course in itself. So when it comes to your course description, so the summary component, so how do you end up the summary? One really is that you must remind your learners, provide a review. What was the main purpose for this module? What are those learning outcomes? What were the key concepts covered? What have we seen in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience? Then next steps, what do you need to build? What can you build on from this knowledge? And then should a learner have extra resources that they need to enhance, then additional resources in terms of PDF, URL, and other resources learners can access to enhance the mastery of this knowledge. So higher education learning objects design. So we have our module. This is the summary that I'm from discussing above. Look like. So all our practicals become, all our topics become information objects. And in them, of course, if there's a topic that has an element of practical nature, then that becomes a practical object. And if at the end of that particular module is an assessment, you have an assessment module object. So we have to emphasize one principle, that always for effective e-learning content design, ensure you have some form of assessment at the end of each learning object. It may be a quiz, it may be a group discussion, it could be a forum, it could be a wiki, but ensure that there is some form of assessment at the end. So what are the relationships of learning objects within a learning object. So for example, if you're having a learning module called web design using a Dreamweaver, then you can have a number of learning objectives. So you can see these learning objectives. Now the learning objectives, you can have a number of assessments per each objective. And you can see each learning objective has some form of assessment. Then each of them has some theoretical, which is basically the content objective. And then we also have which one? The practical objective as well. So this is how you structure your material as you design them. Then we have instructional design, your course. So we pick your module. Let me see if I have what I need here. So this is our course module. Then we said we provide an overview which is clear. Then we have learning objective 1, learning objective 2, learning objective 3. So the pre-assessment I mentioned about. So you can check the knowledge of your learners on each learning objective you have set. Then our information objective is largely really the heart, is the content we are delivering, okay? And this is linked with various, to various, as you can see, we have learning objective 1, learning objective 2, information objective 1, information objective 2, assessment objective, and so on. Then we have post. So we say that the best design, instructional design, is that you have a pre-post design, and we have a post-assessment. So pre-assessment and post-assessment. So largely post-assessment, you can, as you're going to see with different approaches to assessment, you can take summative, or you can have some formative, okay, as you're going to see. So post-assessment, really, you can do an assessment by each information object that you delivered, or you can do a summation of all and assess at once. But the approaches of assessment will also vary. And then, of course, critical to any e-learning course design is this concept. At the end, if you've done assessment, you've done, you've delivered the materials, is there a concrete feedback mechanism for both learners? A lecturer, you are learning. A learner is learning. So that's why you have a lecturer called a facilitator, and there's a learner on the other side. So very, very critical. This activity is always ignored. So people post course materials online. Once the students do their grading, there's no feedback. You must have a mechanism of feedback management. Learners should give you feedback, and should also provide feedback. The learners over the process and over the materials that they have learned. So as you are designing your content, you must ask yourself, what is the mechanism the content is going to be accessed through? So it's going to be iPull. So on demand reduces noise and creates greater flexibility. So for example, you can provide fully customized information with user needs built in, okay? But there's more control. You can have iPush, predefined information, predefined instructions, and more flexibility. But you can also have iPull push or iPush pull, depending on how you would like your learners to be. A classic example of iPull, you can say the learner completes a particular set of activities before another set of content is made available to that learner. So a case in a point, let's go back to the example of computer applications. So I can say the learner must read the material on Introduction to Computing, Foundational Computing, and must pass a quiz before a next module called operating system can be made available to this learner. So that's a very interesting part of learning. The other part is when you go to iPush, means I'm the lecturer, I'm pushing content to the learner. I may have a predefined principle, maybe the learner must, okay? Or I push it based on time schedule. So this week, I will push, I make this material available for this week, Next week, whether the learner has completed the task or not, access or not, I will actually make another set of material or activities available. That's a classic example. So I pull, really it is precondition to certain conditions being met. So this is our detailed higher education learning object as we define it. So number one, look at your learning objective. The learning object is composed of learning objectives, information objective, and assessment objective. Now, when you go to information objective, these involve learning objectives, content objective, practical object, and assessment. But when you go to learning objective, this actually now inform our learning objective category. Remember, we talk about cognitive, affirmative, and performance skills development. This is what we want to achieve. So your learning objective must be defined along these three areas. Then when it comes to your assessment object, then you must well define learning objective, the assessment type, the assessment method, question type, question format, and question learning objective relationship. There must be a relationship between what are you asking given to what you want to achieve. Okay. Now, when you look at assessment type, as I already indicated to you, we have summative assessment, formative assessment, diagnostic needs, and I'll give some reflection on some of these. I know most of us know these things. Then in terms of question type or question method, you can have a test or an exam. I hope this forum will know what's a better difference between a test and exam. We can have an observation. So you can give learners, for example, a task. I know Earth University in Costa Rica is a classic example that does what we call experiential learning. And really, you can observe learners in the field. If you talk about doing crop planting based on lines and rows and so on, so you can actually observe a learner executing a particular task. And from the execution, you can be able to inform a better judgment whether the learner is knowing what they're doing and whether they have mastered sufficient skills to do. Observation largely is very good, where the emphasis is largely on performance and skills transfer. Oral, you can have an oral interview, a survey, or portfolio-based method. So in terms of applications, questions, really you can look at questions that trigger the learner to discuss application of that knowledge he has acquired or she has acquired, or really focus on reinforcing the learner's understanding of the theoretical concepts of why things are what they are. So the question format, really, you really have a lot of options. You can have multiple choice, short answer, you can run an essay, and you can do all sorts of things. So in terms of question learning relationship, you can actually have a one-to-one. What does a one-to-one mean? You can say one question relates to one learning objective. So if I have a course, my course has 10 modules, which are basically 10 learning objects. Now, I can choose to, when I'm making my assessment or setting my, I have to assess students on every learning objective. That is a one-to-one. One question covering one learning object. To take your learning object easier is take about units or modules. So I have a course has 5 modules. That's my course. So I'm going to ask 5 courses in the end, 5 questions at the end of the exam. But each question is going to come from each of those modules. That is a one. Then you can have a minute one. So I can ask very many questions related to only one learning object. So I have a learning object called Introduction to Computing. And I say question 1, types of computers. Question 2, discuss the history of computing. and so on. So I'm asking many questions, but they're all questions related to only one learning objective. Then the other option is really that you have one question that relates to many learning objects. So you have one question that relates more than one learning object. So that is how you are looking at the question learning relationship. So again, the choice you make here is dependent on your learning objectives. What did you purpose to achieve? Okay, and that purpose will tell you how you package your delivery mechanisms and how you assess whether those are the achievement of objectives that you set. So let's quickly, I'm sorry this thing doesn't look cleaner, but maybe we'll get a cleaner one. Now, when you look at assessment design in e-learning, we've already talked about formative, okay, and summative. So summative is largely at the end of each learning period or at the end of a fixed site. For example, at the end of every semester, people sit exams. In the lower levels of education, you sit exams like O-level, PLE, and so on. So every stage there's a clear defined terminal exam that assesses your knowledge and competencies to progress to another. That's largely summative. Formative is really embedded within the delivery mechanisms. So you can say, every day I finish a course, I have to put some sort of a quiz or an assessment that allows me to gauge the level of knowledge transfer, the level of skills development, and to help me build onto what the learners know. So you want to, formative will largely help you to get that instant feedback so that you can use it in improving your delivery of the learning and to ensure that the learners achieve the goals they need to achieve. Bloom's taxonomy of assessment tells us how do you structure your questions, your assessment, and to achieve what? For example, if you're asking a question like define, list, enumerate, state, that question is largely asking the learner remembrance. You are testing the learner's ability to remember certain facts. Define a computer. List different components of a computer. Enumerate the parts of the computer. Okay? State the presidents of East Africa. So there's no really any, it's just awareness of the fact. You are checking whether the learner is aware of a given fact. So that set of, this is always the basic form of assessment you always have. But there's another level which is called understanding, okay? Understand deals with explaining ideas or concepts. So you are aware of your concept. You are aware that the car has 4 legs, 4 tires. Why does the car has 4 tires? And why are the tires of the car not square, not rectangular, but they are a complete circle, a perfect circle? So who can explain that? Why does the car have side mirrors and the side mirrors the way they are? So that means there's an understanding. So you have questions like classify, describe, discuss, explain, locate, recognize, report, translate. So if you're asking questions with that kind of approach, then you are checking the students or the learner's ability to understand why things are the way they are. Then at a higher level, now that we remember the facts, now we understand why things are, there's an issue of applications of knowledge. So using information in a new situation, okay? So you end up having things like execute, implement, sketch, solve, use, demonstrate. So if you have questions in that order, you are asking a learner to apply knowledge If someone would like an application to do shopping using your knowledge and skills in class, kindly write a short code that can execute this. Okay. People have problems with solving prime numbers. Can we be able to write a simple application that can tell whether a number is prime or not? So you are asking the learner to apply the knowledge and the skills they have acquired to actually solve a particular situation. That is application. At higher level of assessment, we can assess ability to analyze. That is drawing connections between ideas. So that's why you see things like differentiate, relate, compare, contrast, distinguish, examine, experiment, test. So at that level, you are checking the learner's ability to analyze issues and be able to justify the differences. Then evaluate. So justify a stand for a decision. So if a learner is presented with certain situations, you want to see at a very high level, the learner is aware of facts, he can analyze, he can apply, can he really tell a difference? So that's what you can say, he makes a judgment and he can defend a judgment, okay? Why now for example, in Uganda, there's an interesting topic of should people buy shares in MTN IPO? So different people are coming up with analysis. You know, the economy, the current performance of the company, and everybody's analyzing things based on his way. So there is a need to evaluate and justify a particular stand. Why would I recommend someone to invest in MTN, or why I should not recommend or make a decision to invest in MTN? So to make that level, you must understand the business domain down here. You must be aware of certain facts. For example, you must have information in terms of MTN performance, shareholding structure, rules of operations, the licensing regime, the future outlook of the economy, and so on. So those are facts. You must have facts. You must understand them. You must be able to apply them in situation. You must analyze the different parameters. Then you can now make an evaluation, whether it is profitable or worthwhile to invest in MTN IPO or not. The last part of assessment material is where learners are asked to produce new artwork. Okay, design, assemble, construct, and develop. So if you tell someone build a software service, then you see in banks, most of you who go to banks or you're trying to transfer money online, they tell you write money in figures and in words. So you have 1,453,224.30. So telling someone to write that figure in words can be a problem. So most people make mistakes. So you can say, can you as a student write for me a service, a simple application that as people attempt to write the amount in figures, the amount actually is written in words automatically, so that they don't make mistakes and they can confirm what they have written is what is correct. Because the banks want to confirm the amount in figures and the amount in words must correlate for a transaction to be deemed to be correct. Such a form of assessment, if you assess a learner at that level, you are looking at creation. The learner's ability to simulate different sections of knowledge, create a new artifact, a new domain of thought. Okay, we are talking about content presentation now. So the presentation of content on the screen is very, very important for e-learning. So much as you've designed everything, you've done a very good thinking, how do you really present your content for the learner? So learner can easily be distracted, disoriented. So you need to avoid too much clutter. Don't make your page as if it's a movie page or your content. Yeah, too many images can actually create distraction and take away the real essence. Too much text can also cause a lot of confusion. Too bright fonts or too bright colors can also have problems. So there's a need to create learning material that is consistent from screen to screen. Don't create a shock. So if you created a pattern, I've seen colleagues, and this is something very common with us lecturers. So you go online, you find a very nice PowerPoint presentation for someone, you don't want to build your own. So you say, oh, this is very good. It's okay, it's very fine if you can do one, but it shouldn't be the consistency throughout. So you can have one material you can accept and acknowledge the source, but don't download this, you put in your learning material, tomorrow you tweak for Drake, Mirembe, another one for Otto Francis, and so on. No, because that also causes confusion to the learner and takes away the authenticity of the learning experience. For page design, keep the pages simple, really, easy to navigate, contents following each other, and so on. Avoid excessive use of animated graphics, because graphics can also create a lot of confusion, sounds, and busy background. You can also use white spaces generously to guide the learners as they make way through your pages. The pages should not also allow scanning back and forth, yeah, across the screen, because if the screen is too wide, then this kind of scrolling really brings problems to the learners. So the page width has to be consistent across the entire context of the material of design. The length of pages should not exceed 2 computer screens. Excess scrolling becomes tedious for learners and also creates a lot of the text can be broken into segments, separated by white spaces and heading. So try to avoid too much text flowing, because it causes a lot of challenges with appreciation. So break the text, put sections, put pages, put images, and so on. So use appropriate font types that can be, there are those fonts that are largely called neutral fonts. The most common one is Arial and Times New Roman, and so they are really the basic fonts that are neutral to most people's eyes and taste. Then make extra text strong contrast in background color. Avoid using bright screen backgrounds. I've said most colorblind people have red-green color blindness. So most of us indeed have challenges. So if you have too much color, red-green is a really clear example. And avoid using these text colors as directions, because people will get lost. So you keep your titles, pictures, and captions close. Interlink the learning object with information object, practical object, and with assessment object, so that there's a consistent line throughout. And the learning object, so that there's clear flow during the learning process. So when a learner is attempting an assessment, he can relate this assessment to the learning object or the information object. So you can use a variety of content presentation techniques, right from discussion boards, chat rooms, email blogs, and so on. The diversity, the better, but it must also be informed by the categorization and classification of your learners from your learning assessment. Okay, I would like to take you through this briefly. So this is supposed to be exercise. I think, Francis, you need to guide me. So we have about, I think, another 20-something minutes. So I would like to let you guys to reflect on the module you are teaching, and then using a higher learning object to create some information objects and assessment objects. I don't know how much time do we have to do this. Let me see, because this is a template for your planning. Okay, so we'll see, of course, how you can. So what we like to see is that you can pick a course, pick your learning objects, define them by what we've provided. So you suggest strategies and assessment, and this will be put in part of the practical sessions we're going to do later this week. Can I have a short break for this? Can we have 5 to 10 minutes, people to volunteer and try to do this? Francis?
I think it is okay, or we can proceed, because I don't know whether you plan to stop in the next 25 minutes and then they go for lunch and come back at 2 p.m.
The plan is to stop in the next 25 minutes indeed. So if you can give them, I have about 2 or 3 more slides. So if they can, I would like really, because we've talked a lot, and when you talk and people don't really do some things, it can look like obvious, but when it's not actually obvious. So I suggest that we try to have 10 minutes The next 2 slides, I will do them in 15 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So friends, Joseph, my colleague, is online. Robert Musim is online. If you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat. Colin is also online, so we can help you along the way. So we return back here in the next 8 minutes. Thank you. We have 5 minutes. If you have questions or anything, you can share in the chat. The team will be more than happy to respond to them. Yeah, so PPT will be made available, so I'm sure of that. Okay, George is asking virtual labs for agriculture. So his opinion, yes, they are good as learning aids. Just like any other virtual reality. Maybe before I give my personal opinion about what I think about them, George, you can unmute yourself and discuss, share your question, exactly what you want to ask. George, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, how are you?
Okay, George, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm just we have been thinking of using these virtual labs for trainings, but sometimes you look at it from a different angle. Yes, because it actually doesn't replace the hands-on training. Yes.
So for example, let me give you two scenarios.
Yes.
So there's one, if you're doing like tissue culture.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and you want to have a virtual lab in tissue culture, right?
Yes.
So the problem with that is that when you can pass the knowledge, you may not pass the skill, because the
true.
touch and feel is actually part of the skill that you pass critically in such a kind of knowledge transfer. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
So I would recommend in such a respect that if you are resource constrained, you use them at certain levels, okay, of simulating awareness, context awareness, and knowledge. Then you will minimize the amount of resources you need, particularly for reusable agents and so on when it comes to a practical lab.
But don't you think at the end of the day that means that we are going to produce half-baked kind of
I agree with you in one or the other. For example, there is
yes.
possible virtual reality for conduct medical training.
Yes.
But you as a person, would you allow a doctor who has never cut a body of a human being, who has graduated from medical school, to actually open your body?
Not really.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying, that virtual reality can aid Okay.
Yes.
Actually, somewhere it may even be more useful for people who are doing like progressive learning, those who have mastered some sort of simple skills. If you are a doctor already, a surgeon, and maybe you want to learn how to operate a new technique, okay, of maybe conducting surgery. In that case, it may be more useful to you because the basic skill of handling a human body and others you can actually have. Okay, so this is where it comes to you as a trainer. Remember when we talked about deciding which components of your module, what is relevant skill and knowledge you want to pass over? Because in this case, if you want to pass on certain skills that involve some touch and feel, virtual reality may not give you that.
Yeah. So in my opinion, I usually think that if we combine the two, the real one and the virtual one, then it becomes very useful. Because for me, for example, if I have, because of my training, I have that experience in molecular biology. So I know there are certain things that I've never done, but if I watch them online, then it's easier for me to do them because I have some background, so it's much easier. But you're assuming you are teaching a first-year student who has no background, so it becomes a little bit difficult. But again, I also think that if we are, let's say we are dealing with masters or postgraduate students, then it's much easier because some of them have this kind of skills already. So it's like giving them new thing, or it's for them it's much easier. But for a fresher, it might be very difficult. Yes. So that's
I totally agree.
Yes.
And that will be my approach as well. So now you appreciate that the principle of pre-assessment and the setting the learning objective and learning outcome.
Exactly.
And you can see from this conversation very, very clearly that where you can now have a blended of learning, that these tools can help us, but there are certain things we appreciate it may not be able to provide. So thank you, George. That has been excellent input.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think our time is spent, so allow me to continue. Joseph, would you like me to ask someone to show up what they have put up? Or the interest of time, we have 12 minutes, so let me maybe use this to complete the slides, and we can ask people to share what they have done. But George's input has been very excellent. So now that we've done this, let's take a deeper reflection. What does it take for you to be an effective teacher in the 21st century? Prof did discuss this yesterday. And number one really is that teaching and developing thinking skills. These are the real hot skills that we need to have. So what George has just shared is a very classic example. We must think about what skills and knowledge we want to pass over the learners. And we must develop appropriate learning models and strategies to deliver that. So in that case, we're talking about things like tissue culture and molecular biology, and we are seeing clearly that if I was going to use virtual reality between undergraduate and undergraduate, maybe I will err it on graduate because they have the hard part, they have had the first-hand experience in their training. The graduate will need to have that the touch and feel experience. We must have a reflection, encouraging reflection, that is with self-reflection and peers. So as a teacher, as a professor, you must regularly benchmark your practice with peers. Do a self-reflection, but also engage peers. So we must regularly develop information fluency, so acquiring new knowledge on information on a daily basis, media, how to interact with media, and obviously, we must all make technology our friend. Tools like how to make simple animations to improve our learning experiences. We shouldn't be sending certain simple tools. Collins will be teaching us content authoring, practical experience with certain tools. So we should be able to author our tools, our materials in a way that makes the learner, meets the learner outcome we've said. Teaching is a project-based approach So you realize that really in the modern world, it's about problem solving. And those who have information and they can apply it uniquely, they are those who have better opportunities. So the approach of problem-based learning is like here to stay. So, of course, involving problem solving, interdisciplinary approach, context learning, and of course, real-world problems. So we have to shift from concept abstractions to real-world at critical realism, whereby we are showing examples that are native. I've been laboring to try to use some simple examples in this session so that we can relate to as we think through the knowledge we're sharing. Assessment. So assessment with students must be clear, transparent, and objective. A student should be able to see from the beginning of the course what are the strategies the student needs to adapt to make the grade for that course. Okay, so it should be clear. It should not be an ambush. It should have some self and peer assessment. So it should be an ability. So in some of the courses, for example, where the students make a seminar, then you can ask the students to grade fellow students. What did you do in terms of presentation, in terms of quality? You put a parameter, and that peer assessment and peer feedback reinforces the learner's ability to achieve their learning outcome. Assessment should also be relevant on tasks or knowledge disciplines. We've seen the desire to link every assessment approach to a given learning object. And critical friends is timely feedback. So learners are learning, they are very agile, they're dynamic, they are transistent, they're technology savvy. They always they ask you to get a response. They do this, they get a response. So timely feedback is key, keeping learners motivated, engaged, and so on. And of course, collaboration is key. So as teachers, we must be collaborate with the students, collaborate with authorities, collaborate with peers as a way to make the learning experience more interesting and more enjoyable. Okay, we don't have a lot of time. I was trying to rush to make sure I have enough time for questions and answers. So we have just three. We have about 7 minutes to reach the break. Thank you very much for listening. Can we have a Q&A? And they hand over to Amitu or Francis to take us through this session. So thank you very much for the audience colleagues.
Okay, thank you very much, Drake. I think you would just welcome the questions from the audience, and then they can type in the chat, or they can just raise their hand, and you can pick any of them to raise a question verbally, or they can type in the chat.
Okay, I think chat would be nice, but also those if you can, chat would be nice so that all have a chance to respond.
Okay, so participants, you are free to send in your questions to the chat. When you are sending in, make sure that you select to everyone such that we are all able to see the question. And Drake and team are on standby to respond to any questions raised. Thank you. Drake, there is a raised hand from Gabriel Mwinjeri.
Okay, let me see it.
Gabriel, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Now, my maybe a concern or observation. You talked about understanding the runner's characteristics, including background, age, and some other information. And I'm wondering, when you look at the process of admission on the university, there is the concept that we advertise the content of a particular course that the student to undertake. I'm wondering, how do you balance? How do you strike the balance between a lecturer in the lecture hall, understanding the background, maybe the characteristics of the student, vis-a-vis that the content that have been designed that it is fit for a particular course? Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. And I will quickly walk through it. Very brilliant question. And these are thoughts from experience and what we've seen working on. One is that indeed, when the learners arrive at the university before you as a lecturer, they have already gone through the process of being admitted and they are fit for that course. But really, experience shows that the learners you have in class, in the classroom, much they all made a grade to be in your classroom, they have different personalities and actually they have different learning abilities. And even they have different background knowledge experiences. So they could attend, for example, physics class, but there are those who attended and passed, but they don't have much of the physics in them. So at the moment when you're going to start a course, it's important and imperative that you engage them, assess them, to determine the prerequisite knowledge they have. You may find that you could have, let me give you a very practical example. This course, the one we are currently running on, makes one assumption that any person attending this has some basic of computer literacy. You can be able to open a computer, you can log to Zoom, you can do so forth. But it may not be the case to some. So someone may be struggling with basics. I cannot even, my network goes off, I cannot even connect to another network. I need to call a system administrator. So that's because the underlying assumption was whoever can attend this course has a basic knowledge. So, but if you had done a pre-participant knowledge assessment in ICT skills, then maybe you could say, let's start with a basics of computer literacy. How to log into a website, how to log into an email, how to send an email, how to use PowerPoint, so that now, when we are talking about how to use an LMS, you already have the basics. But now we are starting teaching you login an LMS. Someone may be struggling even to log in a website. Someone is even struggling to find how to find a website to log in. Okay, so basically that would be my response to you, sir. That look, when the students arrive, one thing we agree as educators, and which we already know, that those students in your classroom will have definitely different abilities, definitely have a different levels of knowledge as far as the background is concerned. So that prerequisite knowledge is your concern. And also their state of learning is also your concern. So some may learn more maybe through peer learning, others may learn through just reading, others may learn through practical experimentations. And therefore you need to learn from them at that level to design your course appropriately with a different expectation. I hope it answers your needs.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, Charles, thank you. Any other comments? We still have 1 minute before we break to class for lunch. Okay, I think I hand over to you, Amitu. I think there are only 2 questions. So thank you, colleagues. It has been a wonderful experience to speak to you this morning and this afternoon. And hopefully that what we've shared can really impact your personal and professional growth and your institution you serve for the betterment of humanity. Thank you very much. Over to you, Amitu.
Okay, thank you very much, Drake, for the excellent presentation. So we meet at 2 p.m. Right now it's 1 p.m. So we meet at 2 p.m. after 1 hour for lunch. So see you all at 2.
Thank you, sir.